and welcome to the Robin's Football Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Robin Lalisse, and today, with NFL training camp on the horizon, I'm going to talk about some news and notes from around the league since the last podcast, including moves by the Steelers, Dolphins, and Ravens. Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson missed most of minicamp and is maybe returning in training camp with a shoulder injury, the same as the sprained AC joint in the 2023 season that ended his season. And it begs the question, is Daniel Jones now in the lead for starter, as Anthony Richardson appears to be coming back but will be on a pitch count if anything, and with the money they spent, $14 million guaranteed, and with Richardson coming off a year where he had the lowest completion percentage since Tim Tebow, Shane Steichen, and Chris Ballard, the head coach and GM respectively, barely survived the season. So, they might just want the more sure thing, which Jones is more accurate for certain, but is coming off a couple of down years his last 2 years with the Giants. So it will be interesting to see how that situation works out for Indianapolis. The Packers released cornerback Jair Alexander, and then he went to sign a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Baltimore Ravens, and he joins a potentially loaded secondary with Marlon Humphrey in the nickel, 2024 first-rounder Nate Wiggins at the outside corner, former Bengal and Titan Chidobe Awuzie as another corner, and then at safety, their first-round pick this year, Malachi Starks from Georgia, and then Kyle Hamilton, the All-Pro. And it looks to be an outstanding secondary, and a secondary that last year for the first 8 to 10 games was one of the worst, not only in the league, but in league history, and then was just dominant throughout the rest of the year and into the postseason. So if that secondary is great and they're able to get more consistent pass rush, the Ravens, again, a massive threat in the AFC. The Steelers made a couple of big moves in the month of June. Jalen Ramsey was traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick, and the full trade terms were Jalen Ramsey, Jonnu Smith, and a 2027 7th-round pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Dolphins trading those pieces for safety Minkah Fitzpatrick and a 2027 5th-round pick. And for Pittsburgh first, they have that and the addition of Aaron Rodgers, and it looks like they're still going in to try to make a run to the postseason and maybe end that playoff winless streak since 2016. Again, Mike Tomlin, in his 18 years, never having a losing season, but that's not really the expectation with the Steelers, at least historically. It's about getting to and competing for championships, and it's a loaded AFC, so it's tough to really see that, but as long as you get into the tournament, you theoretically have a chance. And for whatever reason, Fitzpatrick had been a great player for a long time, but this past season, a lot of communication, secondary breakdowns led to a lot of big plays in the second half of the season. Was he a big portion of that? Who knows? And then you get Ramsey, who can play safety, nickel, outside corner, and he's kind of a movable chess piece that you have with Darius Slay at corner, Joey Porter Jr. at corner. And the Steelers, they spend a lot on the defensive side of the football and don't always live up to it, especially in the back end of the season. And they continue to spend. We'll talk about that moving a bit. And they also get Jonnu Smith, who offensive coordinator Arthur Smith knows and loves from his days as the Atlanta Falcons head coach, and also the Titans offensive coordinator way back. And how does that work with him and Pat Freiermuth? How do you use both those tight ends a bunch? It's a hard thing to do, especially in an offense where the quarterback play has never been quite consistent, and you're hoping for more consistency with Aaron Rodgers, but it's quite the dilemma to see how that's going to work itself out for everyone involved. And for the Dolphins, it doesn't seem like they want to spend any money past this year. They already kind of made that error in giving extensions to Jalen Ramsey and maybe even to Tyreek Hill, and a year later after those big money extensions, they moved off Jalen Ramsey, and then they're having this all off this field drama with Tyreek Hill and kind of making it clear that they don't really want to touch that contract, no matter, even if it would save them cap space this year, it would cripple them in the future. So now they have that out in the contract next year to save a bunch of cap room. And yeah, it just doesn't look like they're definitely all in to win this year. They're more trying to, play the year out, play the season out, see how it goes, and then decide what are we doing at coach, maybe what are we doing at quarterback. And again, this AFC, so many great quarterbacks and teams. Where does Miami fit in that? Remains to be seen. Right now, it doesn't look like they're guaranteed to be a playoff team, and they have that playoff winless streak since about 99, 2000, 23 years, I believe. Another big trade was the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles trading defensive end Bryce Huff to the San Francisco 49ers for a 2025 conditional draft pick. It is a fifth-round pick with playtime and production incentives that could lead to a fourth-round pick. And he, along with Devin White, was one of the two big offseason acquisitions by Howie Roseman for Philadelphia that somehow didn't work in an offseason where they got Mekhi Becton on a cheap deal. They got Saquon Barkley. They just were able to build this Super Bowl roster with some big moves and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as well, although they trade him in the offseason. But sometimes you can be as great a GM as possible and moves don't work out, and it just never seemed to fit as an undersized defensive end that's more a pass rusher than a run defender, and they rely on that in the Vic Fangio defense. And for the 49ers, they have Robert Saleh, who had Bryce Huff with the Jets. Saleh's now the defense coordinator. And you're hoping that if they can stop the run with the amount of defensive tackles they drafted, 2 or 3, and then him and Nick Bosa on third and long can get after the quarterback, that can be massive for them. So the Niners, they want to get back to competing for the NFC West title and maybe getting back to that Super Bowl that they almost won a couple years back. And this is one big move to help with that. The Houston Texans getting some running back depth with Nick Chubb on a 1-year, $2.5 million deal worth up to $5 million. And it looks like they want to get as much depth at the skill position as possible. Mixon, Chubb. Damian Pierce is on the roster. Not sure he's going to stay. Derek Ogunbowale is their special team / third down back. And then they got, a loaded receiver group. Can the offensive line hold up? We will see. The Bengals, Cincinnati Bengals, always the defense is an issue. They let go of Lou Anarumo at defensive coordinator, and then they've made some moves in the linebacker room with linebacker Jermaine Pratt released, and they still haven't found a way to get Trey Hendrickson, their pass rusher who led the league in sacks with 17.5 last year, signed, and he skipped part of minicamp. Though, per ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, the negotiations have resumed, so with all the edge contracts, 1 or 2 that we'll talk about in a little bit, those contracts going up and up and up, how do they get him signed relative to what he thinks his market value is? And then they have the first rounder, number 17 pick, Shamar Stewart, still remaining unsigned and not practicing. They did sign their second round linebacker, Demetrius Knight, the 49th pick in the draft, so Knight could end up replacing Pratt, who went to sign with the Las Vegas Raiders, and they kind of need depth and some veteran pieces on the defense. I think there's a lot that they've done really well, bring in Geno Smith, bring in Ashton Genty at running back, and Pete Carroll in as well, but in order to compete with the big boys in the AFC and even in their own division, the AFC West, 3 playoff teams last year, Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos, they need, as many great defensive players as possible, and that's kind of step 1 for them. Wide receiver Terry McLaurin for the Commanders is still holding out for a new deal, and, you don't want to pay a receiver into his 30s a bunch of money, but he's played so great, so consistently in his entire career, and you got Jayden Daniels off an incredible rookie season on a rookie deal, so spending money now isn't the worst thing ever. Now, they signed Von Miller to be a pass rusher 1 year up to $10 million deal, so they might do that, but not this right now. And everything is in negotiation, but you'd like to get them signed as possible. And Washington as a whole, for a team that, depends so much on a young quarterback and young players playing well, there's an awful lot of reliance, too, on these veteran players and hoping they can still play at a high level, even though they're getting up there and enigmatic. You look at Bobby Wagner at linebacker, Marshawn Lattimore, who they got in a trade last year and was banged up a good amount of the time last year. Von Miller added to the pass rush group. Deebo Samuel traded for. Laramie Tunzel also traded for off a year where he had a lot of penalties. The Commanders, again, there's a lot of people that put them in that Super Bowl bubble and window off of what they did to get to the NFC title game last year. But with a tougher schedule and nobody taking them for granted as an opponent last year, can they follow up? Or are they kind of like Houston was last year, where you thought they'd take that jump and then injuries and certain things happen? I could see either scenario playing out, but, we're about a month and a half away. Other moves around the league, the Broncos signing J.K. Dobbins to a 1-year, $5.25 million deal, $2.75 million guaranteed, and $2.5 million in incentives. And it makes you wonder, they drafted R.J. Harvey out of UCF, who's more of a change of pace, catch the ball at the backfield type of running back. Audric Esme was a fifth rounder last year out of Notre Dame. Go Irish. But, had a not so great rookie year with some fumbling issues and didn't get on the field much. Is he at a point even early in his career where he has to battle immensely to make the roster, with Dobbins, Harvey, Jaleel McLaughlin also up on the roster? But, they're adding a veteran piece and some competition to the room. Some news with the New York Jets. 5-time All-Pro linebacker C.J. Mosley, who had been let go from the Jets, retires from the NFL after 10 seasons with Baltimore and New York, and pretty great career overall. Did sign a couple big money deals with both those teams and didn't quite work out to be the impact player that they were hoping for, especially in New York, but was a guy that played a lot of great years, and we wish him well. Now on the receiver front, Vikings wide receiver Jordan Addison had a DUI case that is now concluded with defined probation. The DUI arrest from 2024, so an NFL suspension could be pending for him, as it could for Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice, after a Dallas County judge sentenced him to 5 years probation and 30 days of jail time that can be served during those 5 years, stemming from his role in a multi-car crash in Dallas during last offseason as well. So both those teams affected potentially by those suspensions, and for how many games, we don't know for either one yet, but it will be something to watch for in the training camp portion of this offseason. 49ers wide receiver Jawan Jennings, who had close to 1,000 yards last year, is now looking for a new contract, even though he signed a 2-year, $15.4 million deal last year, but he outplayed that with his performance last year. And with both Brandon Ayuk and Ricky Pearsall on the physically unable to perform list, Ayuk coming off an ACL injury middle of last year, and I believe Pearsall dealing with a hamstring injury. The Niners, I'm sure, would like to get him back in the building as soon as possible, and he could hold out into training camp if a new deal isn't given and may ask for a trade. So San Francisco, again, having to deal with the receiver room not exactly panning out as they would have liked, and, maybe depending on whether they had won the Super Bowl instead of losing it, would they have attacked the receiver room differently in hindsight with both Deebo's contract and Ayuk's contract? Who knows at this point, but it's kind of interesting to think about with how this situation is turning out or could turn out to be. Forgot to mention with the Dolphins earlier, they did trade for a tight end to replace Jonnu Smith in some form or fashion, to bring in out of retirement Darren Waller on a 1-year, $2 million deal that could be up to $5 million with some incentives. They got him from the New York Giants in exchange for a 2026 sixth, and they got also back a 2027 7th round pick. So can they get any bit out of him after he had been an all-pro, Pro Bowl level player for 2 or 3 years with the Raiders, and then injuries and him wanting to start a rap career kind of got in the way. This season for them could be very fascinating on that front as well as others. The Steelers signing TJ Watt to a 3-year, $123 million extension, $108 million guaranteed per ESPN's Adam Schefter. And, they've built quite the front seven again and again and again with him, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward at defensive end. Derek Harmon was their first-round pick this year. Keanu Benton as the nose tackle. So they're putting in a lot of resources to make sure that defense can limit teams, especially in their own division in the AFC, with going against Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson twice a year. Whether that will lead to another year of, going over 500 and maybe making the playoffs again. The Pittsburgh Steelers, always, predictable in terms of what the end result is, but not how they get there. And in terms of the edge group, TJ Watt now leads the league in average annual value at $41 million per year. Myles Garrett went up to 40, Danielle Hunter 35.6, and then Max Crosby 35.5 million. And you look at all those big edge numbers, what does that mean for guys like Trey Hendrickson, as we mentioned before, and Aiden Hutchinson with the Lions? Do those guys get the deals that they're looking for? And then Micah Parsons for the Dallas Cowboys as well, even though he's only been in the league 3 years, and same as Hutchinson. But the earlier you can get these extensions done, the more you can space that money out. Some more big money extensions around the league. New York, the Jets, they signed 2 of their big 2022 draft picks. Cornerback Sauce Gardner, a 4-year, $120.4 million extension that gets him right above the average annual value of $30 million that Derek Stingley got from the Houston Texans. They have him locked up long term, as do they with Garrett Wilson on a 4-year, $130 million extension. And keeping those guys in place, even paying those much, it's good culture in theory to keep those guys around. Ultra talented, they've proven themselves to be potential prestige players and elite players, but are you getting the most out of them in terms of winning games with them? Hasn't been the case so far. Will it be that way under Aaron Glenn? There's a lot of work to do. The other end of the spectrum, the Kansas City Chiefs, constant contenders, they get their guard Trey Smith to a 4-year, $92 million deal, the highest for a guard, and this was part of the reason they got rid of Joe Thuney, to trading him to the Bears in order to be able to pay Trey Smith what he is worth, and you can't really keep both, unfortunately. And then they had to go cheap at tackle, at the other guard, and then also try and find better at offensive tackle, so they didn't have to go to the let's put Joe Thuney out there because we don't have anything better at left tackle. Some LA Chargers news. Wide receiver Mike Williams, who had been brought back after 1 year away from the team. He was with the Jets and then Steelers last year. He has retired, so at the age of 30, with a lot of pretty good years with him, but then, getting banged up late in his Chargers tenure, and I guess the game aging very quickly for him. Pretty great career, but now the Chargers have to figure out the receiver room. They did find a way to get second-round pick Trey Harris signed to his rookie contract. Najee Harris, a running back, had an eye injury due to fireworks on July 4th. That resulted in, again, a non-football injury list placement. So when he's back for training camp, they said he should be good for camp, but he's going to start off on the non-football injury list. And then the PUP list also includes Raiders defensive tackle Christian Wilkins, Ravens safety Ardarius Washington, Lions left tackle Taylor Decker, and also with the Lions, defensive tackle Aleem McNeil. A couple of intriguing non-transactional football stories that have circulated over the past month. The Pablo Torre Finds Out podcast, they had a couple episodes with Pro Football Talk's Mike Florio regarding the releasing of the ruling in which collusion between NFL owners in avoiding fully guaranteed contracts post the Deshaun Watson contract from the Browns. It was examined, but the NFL ultimately won the ruling, and also one where NFLPA Chief Strategy Officer J.C. Treader said players should look for methods of leverage, including exaggerating injury in contract years. The NFLPA lost that case as well and had to pay a grievance to the NFL. And both those rulings were not publicly available at the time they were decided. And both of those instances, along with other news, the NFLPA Executive Director Lloyd Howell also having a relationship and a part-time job with the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group being a private equity firm that is on the shortlist to purchase minority interest in NFL franchises. And Lloyd Howell, despite serving as the NFLPA Executive Director, had a part-time consulting position and seemed like a big conflict of interest. As a result of the news coming out with these podcasts, Lloyd Howell has resigned as the NFLPA Executive Director, and then Chief Strategy Officer J.C. Treader is also potentially on notice with the Players Association. And the podcast that Pablo Torre did with these two issues, as well as, his Belichick, Jordan Hudson one, and his one on the gambling issue in the NBA with Malik Beasley. They've been some of the better podcasts we've had in years, and he's done an incredible job with them. But it's going to be something to watch out for. How does this affect the NFLPA leadership going forward? Because they brought in someone like Lloyd Howell to be more friendly with the owners and get, a more balanced relationship, whereas DeMaurice Smith was more combative with the ownership group. How does this change going forward? Lastly, the second season of the Quarterback Show on Netflix premiered at the start of August, and it's a great look into how much study and work goes into playing the quarterback position, especially at a high level, whether it's learning a playbook, learning all these motions. I know Kirk Cousins, Joe Burrow, Jared Goff were the three subjects of this season, and one of the things Kirk Cousins, even as a veteran quarterback, basically had to learn a whole new playbook that included 40 different motions. He had to deal with Achilles recovery, and then on top of that, he has to deal with Michael Penix being drafted number 8 in the draft unexpectedly. And he said something that I kind of felt like was something that I would have thought he would have changed his mind differently had he had known and the Falcons been fully transparent about their plan. He felt like he had been misled, and if he had had the information around free agency that Atlanta would have taken a quarterback top 10 in the draft, that probably would led him to stay with Minnesota. The Falcons were willing to give him 2 years of guaranteed money and kind of sold him on, hey, you're the guy to win the NFC South and maybe give us a shot at a Super Bowl. And then, they kind of backtrack and draft a quarterback super high, and they tried to sell it as, we got our quarterback situation for 3-4 years in Cousins, and then, 10 years beyond that with Michael Penix. And Cousins' level of play kind of dissipated due to dealing with an elbow injury that he suffered mid-season. And, it's tough to watch any player, but especially of his caliber, just drop off like that and kind of be unceremoniously benched. I know these guys get paid millions of dollars to deal with it, but still not great for anybody to deal with that. Then you go to Jared Goff, who had his early success years 2 and 3 with the Rams and Sean McVay coming in, but then 2 years later getting kind of traded even before the season ended for Matt Stafford. And it's a win-win trade for both teams, but it was an emotional time for Goff to deal with that, and now he's found his place with the Detroit Lions. And him going through the season that he had where everything was going great, even though dealing with injuries and having to be basically score as much as humanly possible, and then having the off game at the worst time against the Commanders in the playoffs. But it was great to see what he does behind the scenes, and also him and his wife Kristen, they did have their child, and they showed that at the end of the season. And then Joe Burrow having ultra high expectations for himself as well, with a Super Bowl trip early in his career, and then the last 2 years the defense not playing as well, him having to come back through a wrist injury that he suffered in the 2023 season, and then playing as good as he did and winning a primetime game against Dallas, and then getting a call after that game that his house had been burglarized. And you see how much that guy cares about, winning at the highest level. There was a game where they're getting, they're blowing out the Titans, but yet they're playing so inefficiently at times, getting too many penalties, this and that, and not putting up the points and finishing up the game as they want to. And there's just this big blow up between him and Zach Taylor, and it doesn't seem like anything personal. It's just part of the game. But you do sense that another year, two, or more of this for the Bengals in a tough AFC, and they don't even get to the playoffs with a quarterback playing at that high level, does his frustration get any louder or more public? But it's a fun series to watch nonetheless. I've enjoyed it. If you have a chance to see it, go check it out. But this has been the Robin's Football Thoughts podcast with Robin Lalisse. I can be found on X at Rob the Movie Buff. And you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you.